Welcome to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. Stocks whipsawed today, but tech shares turning markets around and helping lead the way back into the green. Investors weighing the chances of a compromise on a new stimulus package. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi are now open to talking after previously stalled talks. House Democrats have drafted a $2.4 trillion proposal, though President Trump has said he's only willing to go as high as $1.5 trillion. Meantime, signs of the ongoing pandemic only getting more prominent. France and the UK reporting a record number of virus cases today. With more on how it's all playing into the markets, Bloomberg's Abigail Doolittle in New York. So Abigail, tech shares going back and forth, but tech leading the way out of the red. Walk us through the day.
It's another amazing one, Emily, but probably more so than some of the other recent days, only because of the whipsaws up and down. Whiplash really captures it. You know, the NASDAQ 100 at the lows early on, down 1.1%, then at some one point up nearly 2%, then just about flat, and then closing higher by about 0.6%. What that volatility tells you on the day, on the week, on the month, and yes, on the year, uncertainty. Nobody knows when you have firm control from either the buyers or the sellers, which you can make the case that between February to March, the sellers were very much in control on the uncertainty around the pandemic. And then when the Fed and D.C. stepped in with support, the buyers took control. But net on the year, Emily, we're just about flat for the S&P 500, telling you it's a real stalemate as we go into the election. Investors really try to figure out all these different factors. Again, this kind of volatility tells you very few people, traders, investors have conviction. However, at the end of the day, tech did save the day to some degree. Those mega caps really came through. Tesla having an up day after a couple of brutal down days on the battery day disappointment. Again, though, you have to remember that stock up more than 350% on the year. So price to perfection, and that battery day simply didn't deliver. Apple and Microsoft also higher. Huge whipsaws there. Apple, you really want to see that stock get back above its 50-day moving average. Has not happened, but the fact that it's even close perhaps is a sign of hope for the bulls. And another sign of hope for the bulls, Emily, the VXN, or the NASDAQ 100 VIX, ending lower on the day. And it's also well off of its September highs, telling you that while volatility is elevated on the year relative to the stock sell-off, it's actually coming in.
I was also watching Amazon shares during their Devices Day. Abigail, shares ending in the green, but only about 0.5%. You were also looking at chips, which also outperformed. What's driving that?
Well, it's pretty interesting because I wish I could say that there was a fundamental reason, but as is the case for so many of these stocks and these sectors and the way that they're moving, I think a lot of it has to do with the froth removal we talked about yesterday from August's huge rally for tech and mega caps, perhaps having to do with some of that option buying that was so in the news just a few weeks ago. But today we have chips rallying, again, not for any fundamental reason, at least that I was able to find. One of our colleagues, Romin Bostic, talked about that there might be some positive chatter out there about for the semi-cap equipment companies, which, as you know, they make the equipment that makes the chip. So potentially an early tell there. But nice to have that tech strength, certainly a piece of it. Another piece of tech strength, Emily, and this, talk about whiplash and uncertainty and unknowns, Oracle. So Oracle, since expressing interest in TikTok, it is going against the green. It is up about 9.4% over that time period. That is not the case for the NASDAQ and the S&P 500, more like up and then down on this volatility. This tells you, despite the uncertainty, despite not knowing what is going to happen next, whether they will be able to acquire those TikTok assets from the U.S. TikTok assets from ByteDance and what the majority ownership will look like, it tells you that investors like the idea that Oracle is trying to diversify, that they are going into a new business, even though it may not make sense to any of us intuitively or initially or right away, or even as you think about it a little bit more. Investors like it. They're, again, diversifying, trying to find some way to grow their revenue stream.
All right, Abigail Doolittle for us, breaking it all down in New York. Thank you so much, Abigail, for your analysis there. I want to talk a little bit more about TikTok now. In a hearing held this morning, the Trump administration was ordered to postpone a U.S. ban on the social media platform set for this Sunday, or respond by Friday, that is tomorrow, to a request by ByteDance for a court order that would temporarily block the ban. With the latest, we're joined by Bloomberg's Mario Parker in Washington, who covers the White House for us. Mario, another day, another TikTok twist. Where exactly do we stand now?
That's exactly the best way to put it. It's been quite the drama for the last couple of months. But yes, as you mentioned, there was the temporary postponement ordered by the court right now, blocking the ban by the Trump administration. So the Trump administration has until Friday to answer. We'll see what they say. We haven't heard much just yet in terms of what the next steps are, but we do know that the president has been quite vocal about wanting to either force this sale or ban TikTok altogether, in the U.S. at least.
Meantime, Chinese state-run media has also become increasingly vocal, calling out dirty tactics by the White House. I mean, are you getting any sense that what's coming out of Chinese state-run media, which is really a megaphone for the Chinese government, is having any impact on the administration or Trump's approach here?
Well, what we're seeing is just a continuation of what we've seen for the better part of the last 3.5 years, which is tension between the U.S. and China, the top two world economies. What you're saying also, of course, is we had a thaw in that relationship earlier this year, right, when they achieved a trade deal after a 2.5-year trade war. But that's ratcheted back up. Tension is ratcheted back up over the coronavirus, some of the president's rhetoric towards the coronavirus, and also kind of the back and forth that we've seen between Beijing and Washington.
So what's your sense then of what happens tomorrow in response to this ByteDance request versus Sunday, another deadline for this app to be banned?
Well, what it means is that we'll be all watching with bated breath all day tomorrow. One thing that we've learned, at least over the last 3.5 years of the Trump administration, is that it's hard to kind of to forecast what the next move is going to be. So what we do know is that we'll have to be watching for tomorrow to get a sense of where they want to go with this thing.
Meantime, obviously a huge and very somber day in Washington today. Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg lying in state at the Supreme Court. President Trump did visit her body there. What is the latest in terms of when we expect him to name his choice and how Congress and the Senate will respond?
Sure. Well, what we've seen is that Republicans have coalesced around the president and said that they overwhelmingly will support him trying to name someone to the vacant seat. We're expecting an announcement that he's been teasing all week for 5 o'clock on Saturday, in which we'll get his pick for the bench. What we do know is that there are 5 women finalists that he's spoken about. We know that he's talked to at least one of them, and so we know that he'll have this announcement on Saturday.
And what is your sense of how Democrats will respond here, given that there is a risk that this consumes the news cycle? If this doesn't happen, you could see Republicans flooding to the polls just so that Trump can get his pick. I mean, there are a lot of interesting political dynamics at play.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. The Democrats have, of course, said that they're going to oppose it. They said that there was precedent set in 2016 with Barack Obama's attempt to fill the seat of Scalia. And so they've opposed that, citing that precedent. Republicans have pushed back. The conundrum for Democrats, of course, is to oppose it, but oppose it without alienating voters in an election year who are already sensitive to some of this, the partisanship in Washington.
Sensitive is one way to put it. Mario Parker, thank you so much for that update. We'll continue to follow your reporting over the next 24 to 48 hours. Coming up, speaking of social media, an early investor in Facebook is set on creating a new social network without all of Facebook's flaws. We're going to speak to Mark Bodnick, co-founder of Telepath, next. This is Bloomberg. While many social media platforms, especially Facebook, have been under fire for their handling of hate and misinformation, an early investor in Facebook and other tech veterans are joining forces to build what they hope will be a nicer and more thoughtful social network. Telepath was unveiled today and lists "Be Kind" as its first rule. Joining us now for more is the co-founder and chair of Telepath, Mark Bodnick. He and Roger McNamee co-founded Elevation Partners back in the day, which invested in Facebook before the company went public. Mark, thank you so much for joining us. Of course, Facebook was one of Elevation's most important investments, and now you're trying to build a social network that doesn't have hate or misinformation or many of the things that Facebook has more recently been challenged by. What exactly is your goal here?
Emily, our goal is to create a space where people can have great conversation. We're really narrowly focused on conversation where people who have an interest can find other people that share that interest and talk about it in a space, usually with people that they don't know previously in the real world.
Now, it's invitation only to start. Like many early tech platforms, you're supposed to use your real name. You are supposed to use your real name on Facebook, and your first rule, be kind. What makes you think you can actually get users to do that? Facebook has 30,000 content moderators, and even they can't do it.
So our view is that if you start out with strong rules and strong systems when you're small, you can basically create a culture where people are kind and where you don't have a ton of disinformation. And this is really a combination of people and software. We require people to use their real names. They have to have a phone number, which we verify with carrier ID. So we think that the bots and fake accounts problem won't be as bad. It's our intent over time to address disinformation by creating trust ratings for different sources and reducing distribution for outlets that we believe recurringly publish fake news. So our intent as we get bigger is to use systems and people to scale.
Some of your early users include the guy running Instagram himself, Adam Mosseri. I saw Reid Hoffman on there when I took a peek. Do you envision this reaching a wide audience, or is this more like a, smaller curated set of people? And if you do envision it reaching a big audience, how do you handle some of this stuff at scale?
So our intent is that it should be a great experience for anybody that likes to talk and have conversation about topics. It's not intended to be a horizontal social network that does everything. It's not a place to share videos, for example. It's really a place for people to, if you have one interest, narrow or broad, you find others that that share that interest and want to talk about it. And again, as we get bigger, our philosophy has been to double and then see what's broken and fix that. And we believe by making kindness and no fake news, important company priorities, that we can keep that culture and that tone even as we get bigger. Now,
it's not lost on anyone that your sister-in-law is Sheryl Sandberg. How is Sheryl and the family taking this?
I have not been super focused in thinking about other companies, nor is Richard. Facebook and Google and TikTok and other, Snapchat, Twitter are so huge. Our focus has really been very narrow. And so I've been working on this for a couple of years. I tend to, my wife and kids are on the site, so it's not like we're hidden in a cave. But in general, we tend not to think about the big companies, because the big companies, we don't see ourselves as like providing some enormous all-encompassing experience that's an alternative to that.
That said, your former Indy, I would like to hear more, but we'll leave it there. Your Elevation co-founder Roger McNamee, he's a guest on our show often. He's become one of Facebook's staunchest critics. I mean, clearly you're doing this because you don't think the alternatives out there are necessarily an option for a lot of people. He has said that Facebook is a threat to what remains of our democracy and has too much power. Do you agree with him?
You know, I was a very early user of a bunch of social platforms, starting maybe a little bit more than 10 years ago. And what I loved about the early social internet was finding people, I would have some narrow interest. None of my friends in the real world shared that interest because they thought I was crazy to be so intensely focused on this film or psychology or parenting. And then, whether it was on Facebook or Quora or forums, I would be able to find people. And so our goal at Telepath, in some sense, is to recreate what those early communities felt like. So we'll see. I don't know. That's in some sense what really motivates Richard and I is to recapture. I look back over the last 10, 12 years, and I think more than half of the friends I've made, new friends, started off on the internet. And so we'd like to be able to create that experience for our users.
Now, TikTok has very much been in the news and has provided stiff competition to Facebook and has offered a new kind of social network. The people behind TikTok say they want to be an uplifting place for users to go. What are your thoughts on TikTok as an alternative?
So, I guess I have two kind of opposing views. On the one hand, it's super fun. I use it a lot. It's really enjoyable. I do think it's makes me feel good. I think it's actually remarkably good about politics sometimes, and obviously music. But, I read a lot of Ben Thompson from Stratechery, and his writing has persuaded me that, the political issues that have been identified by many people, involving TikTok are potentially dangerous. So I'm kind of split.
Right.
Do you read Stratechery?
Okay. Well, I do read Stratechery. I do know Ben Thompson. I'll take a closer look at some of the things he's written more recently, and we'll get you back on the show to talk about it. Mark Bodnick, co-founder and chair of Telepath, will be watching to see how it shakes out. Coming up, Amazon revealed a slew of new products and partnerships today, including Echoes for kids, even a gaming service. We're going to talk to Dave Limp, Amazon's senior vice president, next. This is Bloomberg. New Echoes for kids, with and without video, and more. Amazon's annual device event was jam-packed today. The company unveiling new security cameras for cars and home, Fire TV products, as well as a cloud gaming service and controller called Luna. Earlier, I caught up with Dave Limp, Senior Vice President of Devices and Services at Amazon.
Well, I think it is a big market. Gaming, we're kind of in the renaissance of gaming right now, and different customers are going to want different types of gaming, and I think Luna brings that to them. We really focused on the idea that gaming isn't just in one place, and being able to do AAA games often takes a very expensive PC, or you can't even run them because you're running an operating system where those games aren't available. And Luna allows those games to transfer from location to location, from a $49 Fire TV stick to a iPhone over to a Mac and to a PC seamlessly, because the controller can just sync automatically between those devices. And we think that's truly different than a lot of the other things that are out there today.
That said, Amazon Game Studios has had some setbacks. You released, then unreleased games. Some games have been delayed. What is the incentive for a Microsoft to put Bethesda's games now on Luna? Some of the biggest game publishers, their huge customers are Walmart and Target, which are Amazon's arch rivals. Do you need more original titles to make this work?
Well, we started with 2 different channels on Luna, the Luna Plus channel, which has over 50 titles in the early access. And then we also announced a partnership with Ubisoft, where their titles will come out, many of them day and date. And listen, every different publisher is going to have a choice of where they want to put their games, but we think we bring a lot of advantages. We bring a deep integration into Twitch, where game streamers have already said they're really loving what Luna brings. And we think we'll bring lots of different types of customers that you may not get through the console market or through the traditional PC-based market. And if we do that, then I think the content will come.
So Dave, let's talk a little bit about what comes next. I want to talk about these Echo devices that you unveiled, a new spherical Echo. What have been the most surprising ways that folks have used Echo in their homes during COVID?
You know, the home is becoming people's classroom. It's becoming their movie theater. It's certainly becoming my workplace. And what you can sort of see Echo-based devices and Alexa in general helping across all of those. You know, we see people using it to help learn. It's a great homework helper. She's much better at math than I am, and Alexa that is. And you know, so we added some new features with Alexa being able to help kids read. We added a kids mode so that she can automatically know when she's talking to a child now and sort of cater her responses based on the age of that child. And with entertainment, you know, it's just hard to go to a movie theater these days. So people are streaming more and more, over billions of hours a month on Fire TV right now. And being able to use Alexa and Fire TV to quickly find the shows you love has also been a completely exploding use case over the past 6 months.
I was particularly intrigued by the Echo Dot for kids. I am curious, this is your first time doing a virtual gadget reveal. People can't feel and touch these devices. How much of a challenge is that going to be going into the holiday season, and how do you expect that to impact holiday sales?
Yeah, that's one of my favorites that's here. You can see it's really tiny, super cute, but I think we're going to have to be better at explaining our products across the board. You know, luckily at Amazon we have 20 plus years of experience of doing that, and but I also think that as we get closer to the holidays, people hopefully will be more comfortable going out to physical retailers as well. And you know, what we want to do is just build great products and try to explain them as simply as we possibly can, and hopefully customers will love them as much as the team loved inventing them.
Dave Limp there, Senior Vice President of Devices and Services at Amazon. Coming up, cloud-based infrastructure continues to soar amid a remote workforce. What trends are here to stay? We're going to ask cloud software CEO Aaron Levie for his predictions post-pandemic next. This is Bloomberg. Welcome back to Bloomberg Technology. I'm Emily Chang in San Francisco. The pandemic has forced businesses to keep their workforce remote and increase spending on technology that will continue to make that possible. The S&P 500 Software Index shows cloud-based companies growing dramatically. We also saw the listing of some major cloud-based IPOs last week, valuations rising into the tens of billions. Box, a company focused on cloud solutions for enterprises, is one of the incumbents and joins us now for a closer look at the sector. CEO Aaron Levie with us now. Aaron, great to have you back on the show. So we saw a deluge of tech IPOs last week. I saw you tweeting about it. So Snowflake in particular standing out with its shares soaring over 100%. What do you think these newly public tech companies, cloud companies, can expect in the near term?
Well, you know, I think certainly the macro market is very volatile right now. So I think you're just going to see a probably dynamic range of prices, you know, both on the day of IPO and the subsequent trading. And it's always, you know, I think we're gonna have a lot of different narratives about did people leave money on the table? Did, you know, stocks go down or up, you know, in any of the kind of trading periods? But I think the broader maybe macro thing that we're seeing is these are companies that in many cases were founded 7, 8, 9, 10 years ago. And they've now reached a scale with even more of a tailwind right now because of this move to digital. And in many cases, these are companies going after incredibly large, you know, multi-billion, multi-tens of billion-dollar markets that have, you know, a tremendous amount of growth going forward in front of them. And so I think you're just going to continue to see this IPO pipeline. Because over the past decade, we've seen dozens, if not hundreds, of very disruptive enterprise software companies emerge and get funded and really be able to reach scale.
Now, you compared Snowflake to Google, and I'm curious, how much bigger do you think the market can get? I mean, do you think we could look at a Snowflake in the future in the same way we look at Google today?
I'm not gonna. I don't think I can make any kind of stock trading, tips on this chat. But what I would say is, to me, it was more of just the sheer amazement of. I remember, Google being this jaw-dropping valuation and kind of game-changing and a historic IPO in terms of their scale, and then you have Snowflake, which is I think in many cases a company that is not necessarily known by consumers generally, but it's a very disruptive enterprise software company. Actually, going out and going public larger than Google did. So it's to me, I just think a profound statement about the power of the cloud, the scale of these opportunities. Obviously, for Snowflake to be as big as Google, a lot of other things would have to happen in terms of their portfolio. But more of just the size of these companies and the markets they're going after are so enormous. And we would not have probably anticipated that 5 or 10 years ago. If you had said, are you going to see an enterprise software cloud company that doesn't exist today back in 2010? Going public at 60 or 70 billion dollars, I don't know who you'd be able to find that would say yes to that. So these markets are enormous. The opportunities for disruption only continue, and I think we're just going to continue to see more and more companies go public.
Well, we've got Airbnb coming up, Palantir, Asana, and there's this debate that's continuing to rage about pricing, how much money was left on the table. If they are so focused on institutional investors, do you think those investors are really that valuable at this point, given how much liquidity is out there? I mean, do you think they could have raised the price? I mean, a number of these companies could have raised the price and raised a lot more for themselves.
I probably am a little bit on the opposite end of the side of Bill Gurley on this. First of all, I think it's great that there's lots of different ways to do an IPO, direct listings, and more of a traditional IPO. I think it's fantastic that the market supports different approaches. Now you have SPACs in the mix as well. But I would for us, we went public with a fairly traditional approach. Our stock went up by maybe 70% or so in the first day of trading. We didn't really feel like we left money on the table. We were happy to be public. We got great investor support. I think a lot of times some of these things are easy to look at in retrospect. You don't often know that just the sheer demand, for a new public offering at the start of the IPO process. So, some of this ends up being, I think, easy to be able to comment on after the fact. But also, I just think, from an entrepreneur and from a company and corporate standpoint, I think your biggest priority when you're going public is making sure you can educate investors, building a strong set of support in your IPO process. And I think that, sort of incrementally leaving 10 or 20% of financing on the table is not usually the most important factor that you're focused on. Maybe it should be, which is, again, why it's great to have these different points of view out there.
Now, the biggest near-term cloud news could come out of TikTok, and surely Oracle is an unlikely partner, stakeholder, whatever you want to call it, though it's also a political hot potato. How do you weigh the sort of benefits of, an Oracle bringing that into its portfolio?
Well, I think in general, first of all, we're only going off of what we hear from the U.S. side of the conversation. I know that there's different views on the likelihood of success of this, from the China side. So, but based on the latest information, I'd say it's probably a win in all accounts for Oracle. I don't think there's a single negative on their end. They get a large cloud customer. They have an ownership stake as opposed to maybe what initially was perceived to be a kind of an acquisition or operational stake in the business. So I think from a pure corp dev standpoint, you might see an appreciation on the equity value, as well as have a large cloud customer that's going to just push your platform forward, make sure that you're continuing to innovate. I think that all those things are great. One very brief aside on Larry Ellison specifically, I think it's sometimes is forgotten that in the 90s, there were actually multiple efforts to get into consumer businesses, built on the Oracle platform. So this is actually not as crazy as it looks, from afar when you just think about Oracle, only on the dimension of enterprise software. But ultimately, I think Larry has been very sort of strategic in timing consumer markets that can get backed by enterprise technology. In the 90s, it was the internet superhighway and leveraging the television box. and cable box to be able to distribute information powered by Oracle. So there's been moments where this actually has some precedent within his strategy. But I think in general, it's probably a good move for Oracle. I think there's a broader issue that I have, which is really just the precedent that this could set for geopolitical dimensions to the internet, and I think there's a lot of risk in that. So I think the greater concern for me is, what happens if other countries start to look at the U.S.'s actions in this space and try and replicate that for companies doing business in their country. And what you could imagine is a very unsustainable approach to having an open internet, where you have very kind of balkanized silos, where not only just data has to be stored in region, but you actually have to have ownership and operational control within that specific region. That would be a nightmare for most global internet platforms. One of the powerful things about the internet is that a company, generally speaking, can do business anywhere. And while there are plenty of cases to be made that that's not true in China, the issue is that I think a lot of countries look to the U.S. to setting maybe a better internet standard, and now we're definitely kind of easing up on that, and that's to me the greatest risk of this transaction.
Now, enterprise software companies have historically relied on these huge sales conferences to drive sales of the software throughout the year. You just wrapped BoxWorks, which is normally this huge.
We're pivoting.
Okay. You just wrapped BoxWorks. Yes, we're going from TikTok to BoxWorks. That's what I just did.
Okay, good.
Which you just wrapped your big, enterprise software conference, and you had to do it all virtually. And I'm curious, how did it go? What did you learn? And do you think that these big conferences are going to return in a post-COVID world? Do you actually need to do them?
It's a great question. I do love the very smooth segue from TikTok to enterprise software conferences. So we did just have our virtual conference last week. We saw somewhere between 4 and 5x the scale of registrations that we would normally see in one of our physical conferences, our annual conference. We saw higher engagement in a lot of areas than normally we would see. Overall, great levels of attendance and engagement on our keynotes and product updates. So at certainly, as you can imagine, much lower cost. Much easier way to get this content out to our customers. So I think there's a lot of benefits to a virtual conference. We're able to hit maybe demographics of our customer base that maybe previously wouldn't have been able to go and fly out to San Francisco and come to Moscone for a 2 or 3 day conference. So there's real benefits of the scale of impact of customers we can make sure that we interact with, that we can engage with. There is, a difference in terms of being able to have, conversations one-on-one with customers. So it's a different experience from that standpoint. But I think we were able to make do with the environment, which is you had to move to virtual. Now we're really asking the question, well, okay, how does this look in the future when you can actually have physical conferences? Maybe it's next year, maybe it's the year after. Do you still rely on a virtual first environment? Do you have a bit of a hybrid conference? These are some open questions that the industry is going to have to ask. But overall, I think we were very happy with the success of the event.
Now, you've got customers ranging from Morgan Stanley to AstraZeneca. We do know for sure there's more uncertainty ahead. What are you mapping out? Are you mapping out like a mass return to work or a prolonged, distributed, perhaps permanently distributed and virtual workforce? And what does that mean for business?
Yeah, so I think probably at each stage of this pandemic, I've been wrong by like 2 orders of magnitude on timelines and amount of impact. So I'm probably the last person anybody should look to on predicting this stuff. But in general, what I actually think our approach has been, and what we've seen from the best customers we work with, is it behooves organizations to have a focus on flexibility and resilience. And so that way you don't really have to make accurate predictions on, when are people going to go back to the office? When are, when are things going to kind of, quote unquote, open up from a business standpoint? So I think when you look at it from that dimension, which is we can't be in the business of predicting this because there's so many factors in terms of societal, healthcare factors, vaccine factors. These are not things that any one individual business can go and predict. So it's much better to set up your organization to be resilient to being able to, remain in a remote world, even when offices, do start to open up and when people want to have more flexibility. So I think, it's definitely, we're in the middle of next year, almost no matter what, at a minimum, because schools and the school season is sort of forcing companies to have to make sure that they have long-term flexibility for parents that have, kids at home that are doing remote classes. So I think we're in the middle of next year before you see, really any kind of at scale opening up. And even that would only work with the healthcare crisis being resolved in some degree between a vaccine, therapies, for remediating the problem, or, just wholesale mask wearing and social distancing techniques. So, but at a minimum, the companies we talk to are seeing the benefits of productivity in this environment and expect that they want to maintain some of that going forward, even when offices do open up.
All right. Well, I appreciate your attempt at predicting the future when there is so much that we don't know. Aaron Levie, CEO of Box, always good to have you here on the show. Okay, coming up, what is at stake for the future of remote work? How do companies manage a distributed workforce? We're going to talk to the CEO of PagerDuty next. This is Bloomberg. As millions continue to work remotely for the foreseeable future, companies are racing to develop technology to help businesses run more smoothly and boost employee productivity. Another business that's doing that is PagerDuty, a provider of digital operations management services. The company's seeing a boom in online activity from their clients. Joining us now for more on the future of remote work, PagerDuty CEO Jennifer Tejada. Jennifer, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show. Just because I think it will help us better understand what PagerDuty does, you are seeing a huge increase in the number of quote-unquote incidents that you are responding to with your technology because so many people are working from home. Talk to us about the demand that the pandemic and remote work is putting on your services.
Well, thanks so much for having me again, Emily. It's great to see you. Look, I think what's happening is we're all living, working, and learning online. That's putting a tremendous amount of pressure on online businesses, whether you're Zoom and you're supporting the entire world in engaging via video, or you're Peloton, and a lot of people have moved to on-demand exercise. And what that means with more traffic on these platforms is they're experiencing more unpredictable, unexpected challenges, and that's normal. But when you see such an abrupt or quick increase in traffic, you also tend to see an increase in incidents. And the challenge is incidents are not necessarily a site going down or something going dark. They're all about you not being able to transact the experience you wanted to have. And when that happens as a consumer, you may quit. You might find a different app. You might find a different alternative. So it's really important for these businesses to be able to address these incidents quickly. And PagerDuty is the digital operations management platform that helps our customers like Peloton, like Zoom, the New York Times, DoorDash, Lockheed Martin, AT&T. We help these folks manage all of this complex technology so that they can identify a problem using software and machine learning before a customer feels an impact. And what's happened in the last 6 months since the beginning of COVID is we've seen an increase on average of 40% more incidents on the platform. And yet our customers are actually resolving those incidents or getting back to normal faster, improving by about 20%. So that means the platform's working for them. It also means that their teams, the digital frontline, are also working a lot of extra hours and extra time to try and manage this overnight transformation that we've seen to digital.
Speaking of managing this transition, I know, you just did a big acquisition. You're buying a company called Rundeck, which will help build out the technology that you already offer. Other CEOs have talked to us a little bit about the challenges that they've faced just managing a remote workforce from home. And I'm curious for you personally, what's it been like being a CEO of a public company, managing, so many people that you can't see in person every day?
It has been a massive learning curve. On one hand, I think we were quite well prepared for it because 20% of our workforce was already remote. What we do is largely digital. So the ability to move home overnight was pretty straightforward. I think the bigger challenge is that it's been much harder to change your processes around things like hiring executives. Or to your point, we acquired a company without me being able to visit them in their offices, which felt a little unusual. So you have to change your diligence processes. You really have to adapt such that you feel like you can really get to know that new executive or that new team really well, even if you can't see them in person. And I did make a road trip to sit down at a picnic table, socially distanced, with Alex Honor, the co-founder of Rundeck, to help us build that partnership. So we've also, had to try and tweak things to make it work. I will tell you that it's also put a lot more onus on us communicating much more regularly with our teams, with our customers, with our employees, so that you have that constant connection. And as a mom, I used to travel quite a bit for work, more than 50% of my time. And one thing I knew was that if I let a day go by without talking to my daughter in the morning and in the evening, little problems became big problems. Small challenges became big challenges. So that constant connectivity is really important. It doesn't necessarily have to happen over video, but you need to keep your hands on the pulse of what's going on in the organization. And we've also been trying to find different ways to collaborate and innovate, which is harder when you can't do that in an organic way in the office. But we're like I said, we're learning a lot. We're using new tools. We're making a lot of progress.
Those touch points, Jennifer, so important. Jennifer Tejada, CEO of PagerDuty, thank you so much for joining us today. All right, still ahead, Spotify setting its sights on the big screen, hoping to turn its podcast library into valuable stories for Hollywood. And the audio service has an Oscar-nominated producer now behind them. All the details next. This is Bloomberg.